remove the tire, 19mm socket. Going to loosen the jam nut. I got a 20mm wrench, and I'm just going to put it right on there and give it a good pull down. Now we can take the castle nut off. So if your tie rod and castle nut comes with a cotter pin, feel free to move it, get it out of the way. This one is partially broken in, so I'm just getting what I can out, and then I'm just going to put a socket on there and get that off. 20mm socket I have on the castle nut. So you can use a pickle fork, but where we're replacing it, I'm just going to hit that knuckle and it should pop it right out. You want to count the turns, so we're going to go with noon time. 1. So 13.5. So I know it's 13.5 turns out, so I put a pair of locking pliers on the inner tie rod end, and I'm just going to measure, and I am literally at 7/8. So I know it's 7/8. Now we have to take that jam nut off. 20mm socket, and hold on to it with your locking pliers, and it should spin right off. So we're going to take this inner clamp off this bellow boot. I'm just going to take a pair of cutters, twist that right off, and to replace it I'll be using a wire tie. With a pair of pliers I'm going to take this outer clamp off the end of the bellow boot, take it right off. I'm probably going to reuse that. Now you can just reach right in, grab that bellow boot, pull it off the rack. So sometimes you can't get the bellow boot to slide down the inner tie rod end. So I take a little pick, straight on pick, and I open it up and I'll spray with any sort of penetrating spray. Let it get all the way around. And then once that settles in, you can just pull the boot right off. So now you can pull the bellow boot off, and that exposes right inside that inner tie rod end where it mounts to the rack. So on the inner tie rod end where it meets the rack, this is actually the lock that stops it from trying to spin back off. So it's a little piece of tin and it's peened over on this side, and there's identical setup on the other side. So I take a nice flathead punch and I'm going to straighten this out. Because you want to be able to spin that tie rod end. That's the whole point of it. So that one's straightened out. Now we're going to go to the other side and do the same thing. So I'm going to take the inner tie rod end out with my inner tie rod end tool, and it has like a open end wrench style, fits on those notches. Then it has a long tube. Clicks in. And then a 1/2 inch breaker bar. You're going to twist that until it breaks free. I can see. Spin that right out. So now you're going to take your new inner tie rod end and the pack of grease that comes with it, and you want to pack the inside of that velocity joint, because that's basically what that is. Don't just leave it on the surface like that. We're going to pack it in just like a wheel bearing. So now with that grease like that, you're going to pack it in to that joint. You can't move it right now because of it's so, it's new and it's really a tight joint. So once we thread this in, then I'll move this part of the tie rod end around so I can slide the grease in, and it will get all around on that ball and that pivot ball. So the flat lock that we took off, we have to reuse. but you see the keyways in that? So you want those keyways lined up with that rack. See how that has the slots? So I'm going to put it on the end of the tie rod end with those keyways pointing in, and then I can thread the new inner tie rod in. And then while I'm turning that, I'm going to put those keyways and lock them right in. Now that I got that inner tie rod in bottomed out and that tin lock in place, I'm going to take my tool and I'm going to tighten this inner tie rod in, and then we will repack it and re-peen over that metal. I'm just going to try to snug this on. I think it's stuck on that lock. There we go. Now we can put our tool on, and we're going to snug that down. Now, pay attention when you're doing an inner tie rod in, because you are torquing and putting pressure on the inner gear of that rack. So once that tie rod end bottoms out, you'll feel it bottom out. You want to really just give this an 1/8 of a turn to a 1/4 turn. Do not rank on it, because you will crack the actual steel shaft in there. So you just want to bottom it out, give it a little tweak, and then that's what that lock is going to do, is make sure it doesn't back off. You can use any side of this to peen over. Some people like to do the opposite sides. I'm going to use and do all sides that I can get to. So that way I guarantee it's not going to back off. So the tie rod end that we got here is extra nice because it does have 4 flat sides to it. So now, before I replace the bellow boot, I'm going to show you a little trick. Use some dielectric grease and put it on the end that the jam nut's on. So that way, the inner tie rod end, when they go to do an alignment, will spin freely in this boot, and the boot won't get twisted up because it's dry. And the person doing the alignment will be thankful. So before I put the boot back on, I'm going to do like I said earlier, and I'm going to move this tie rod end, and I'm pushing it all the way to one side, and I'm going to pack that grease right in that joint the best I can. Then I'm going to pull it this way, let the grease go in, pack it in this side. I'm going to work it up and down. You just want to make sure the grease gets on the actual pivot point. So now I can take the bellow boot and slide it right over. You want to make sure that this goes all the way onto that notch, clicks, you'll feel it click in place. Then you're going to pull the bellow boot over the rack. Make sure it's right over that nice little groove. You want that to sit in place so that when it gets tied down, it won't go over that. I'm going to loop the plastic tie and I'm bringing it down the end, so that way I don't have to try to manage to get that to come all the way around. Call it a little cheating. What I learned through the years of just take your pliers and hear it clicking one tooth at a time until it doesn't click, and you know that it's pretty much as tight as it's going to get. Make sure the boot doesn't move. Got the excess off. So now I'm going to take the other wire tie and I'm going to loop it on there. I want it to ride right in that ridge. See that ridge? That's where I want it to stop. Let's give it one more last little, then cut off the excess. So before I install the outer tie rod end, I'm going to spray the threads with copper spray, so it'll go right in the threads and it will help the future for anyone that wants to do an alignment or change these out again in several years. That way the tie rod end will thread on easily and stay mobile. Now I'm just going to take my measuring tape and measure again where the jam nut was, and it was 1 7/8". And I'm still going to count the turns on my tie rod end, but I will be as close as I can be. All right, so it was 13.5 turns, and I ended up on the down, and it needs to be up to install. So let's see. So this is the half, so we'll count 13.5. 1, 2, 13.5. We'll bring that knuckle right in, put that tie rod in right up there. Stop that tie rod end nut by hand, and it is self-locking. It has a nylon thread tip, so that'll stop it from backing off. So we're getting 19mm socket. So we're going to torque the outer tie rod end stud nut to 20 foot-pounds. So now with a 21mm wrench, I'm going to tighten up my jam nut. Basically, you want to bottom that out. The tie rod will turn like that and give it a good tug. You can straighten that right back out. And as always, don't forget, once you've changed any steering or suspension parts, get yourself in alignment. So now I'm going to finalize the actual tire. Okay, wheel torque is 88.5 foot-pounds for the wheel.